Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Converged Systems, from Infrastructure Alternative to Data Center Standard, outlining the recent results of our Converged Infrastructure research. I'm Allison Crawford, and I'll be your host for today's session. Data center customers continue to seek alternatives to piece-part IT infrastructure that expands in complexity as businesses grow. Once an alternative for these customers, Converged systems have become a go-to infrastructure for data centers around the globe. Cisco, Dell, HP, IBM, Oracle, and other vendors are competing to secure a share of the $17.8 billion global market opportunity, and TBR research shows certain vendors pulling ahead in areas of customer satisfaction. Over the course of this presentation, Senior Analyst Christian Perry will cover the drivers impacting this market, followed by Q&A of these trends and how they will affect you. Before Christian gets started, I'd like to cover some housekeeping issues. First, we're recording today's session and we'll be posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit this channel to watch this presentation or any of the others that we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the materials we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments to the Q&A or chat function. Christian will address them at the end of the presentation. Or, if you'd like to set up a client inquiry for more detailed private discussion, please reach out either to Christian or myself at the end of the presentation to set up that conversation. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the presentation. You can also find the slides, as well as other thought leadership pieces, webinar decks, and commentaries on SlideShare at www.slideshare.net/TBR_market_insight. And we'll share all social media links with you again at the end of the presentation. Now let me introduce Senior Analyst Christian Perry on the computing team here at TBR. Christian leads our data center research team and is spearheading our hyperscale and converged infrastructure initiative. His insight into the operations and competitive strategies of data vendors helps our clients improve their strategic go-to-market plans and performance. And with that, let me hand this over to Christian.
Thanks so much, Allison, and thank you all for joining once again. And I'm glad you're here. Today we're going to cover quite a bit of insight from our Converged Systems research. This is the second consecutive year that we've performed this customer research and have plenty of interesting insights that came out of the field as this market evolves and grows. So today, what I'm going to cover are several areas. One of those is customer satisfaction, and what we did find, as we found last year, is that in general, customers are at least satisfied with their systems, if not very satisfied, across many of the vendors that we cover. However, there are some regional differences by vendor and by customer, and I'll talk to some of those. As Allison mentioned, we do see some vendors pulling ahead in certain regions. And as this market matures, we did expect to see some separation. And now we are beginning to see it. With that said, there's still plenty of room for growth and for opportunities for customers or for vendors to improve customer satisfaction. Something else I wanted to touch on were workload plans and the behaviors customers are exhibiting around workloads. What is driving purchases? What are customers actually deploying? And then what are they planning to deploy moving forward? And as this is our second consecutive year of looking at what customers are doing, now we're starting to see in this more mature market some workloads settling in, and then customers looking outside of that comfort zone to look at more business-critical workloads for these systems. There's a whole comfort level going on here, and as customers become more experienced with the systems and understand how they are going to coexist with the rest of their infrastructure, now we see some movement among workloads. And I did talk about that we're going to cover some of the vendor separation, if you will, in terms of customer satisfaction, so I will be touching on that. So first and foremost, we always get the question, how do you define a converged system? And simply to us, it's a pre-configured and or pre-validated combination of compute, storage, networking, and system management software. It's a broad definition because we want to capture the entire customer space. So that does include pre-built systems such as a vBlock. It also includes reference architectures such as a vSpecs or a FlexPod. And it does include platform-centric systems such as an Oracle Exadata. So we do cover all types of systems in this satisfaction research. We did actually quota by 5 of the top vendors in the space, including Dell, HP, IBM, Oracle, and Cisco, but Cisco only as it exists within vBlock, vSpecs, and FlexPod, not plain vanilla UCS. We don't consider that a fully converged system. So within that research, we looked at a wide range of factors, including budgets, including which verticals are deploying which types of systems. We looked at workloads, system attributes. These are all the core components or factors that we look at in most of our customer research, and we do it here. And we wanted to see how converged systems are starting to change the ecosystems in data centers. And so we came away with a lot of interesting insights, and I will touch on a lot of those. We did have almost 1,400 individual responses in this research. This report published in July, and that's across a lot of different company sizes. The survey respondents belong to organizations with at least 1,000 or more employees, and the survey sample itself was split. About 62% of the respondents were IT decision makers, so those CTOs, IT directors, IT managers, and the remaining 38% were line of business executives, so those C-level executives, directors, and managers, so on. Some of the respondents own more than one brand. They responded individually for each brand. And we covered a wide range of verticals. We had natural fallout across verticals, but those included IT, financial institutions, manufacturing, retail, and so on. Those types of verticals which you would expect would be heavy adopters of converged systems, all represented here. And the company sizes also, we had a very almost even distribution between, for example, smaller enterprises with up to 2,499 employees, and then 20,000 or more employees. So those are all represented here. So the big difference, one of the big differences that we saw between last year and this year. Last year we saw customers generally satisfied with their converged system experience, and then reflecting that in their budgets moving forward. We're seeing even stronger budget plans here in 2014 moving ahead over the next 12 months. And we did find that these customers across all of these 3 regions, so the countries that we covered were US, France, Germany, UK, China, India, and Japan. Across those regions, we found an expected median budget of $455K over the next 12 months. So that's through next July. And so we put together a couple other factors as well, and developed what we saw as a $17.8 billion global market opportunity moving forward to that time frame. And when we look at this next year, we expect that these budget plans to be very similar. We don't expect them to go down because now that we see some of the movement with workloads and other opportunities for workloads, aside from those very data-centric, low-hanging fruit type of workloads, now we're seeing more opportunities for sales and more movement or activity on the customer side in terms of how they're using the systems. Something else we looked at this year. Last year we looked at the attached services, which we expected would be a strong part of the overall converged purchase, and it was. What we wanted to look at this year were the additional software and hardware purchases that occurred with converged system purchases. And in many cases, customers are indeed purchasing additional hardware and software along with converged systems. In some cases, this is hardware and software that is being deployed to support that system. It might be data type software, analytics. and it might be networking to support the additional infrastructure in the environment. But that's not always the case. In some cases, customers are actually buying other systems, traditional x86 servers, along with their converged systems, because these aren't inexpensive purchases, and these are budget holders with rather significant budgets in many cases. And with that in mind, they have the power to make infrastructure purchases outside of converged systems, and they're doing so at the time of these purchases in many cases. So plenty of opportunity beyond just the converged system itself to sell into customer environments. Those converged systems are becoming more of a tip of the spear type engagement into environments, and those might be existing environments, existing customers, but now customers are looking at these systems as a way to get around a lot of the challenges that they have with traditional infrastructure, including complexity, rough management or difficult management across a heterogeneous environment, lack of staffing, and so on, or even lack of budget. Even though there are a lot of upfront costs with converged systems, I think that customers realize that they can in turn realize better savings down the road than they can from traditional infrastructure, which again pulls through a lot of costs when you factor in all of the disparate management and so on. So workloads. We did find, so last year we asked customers what workloads they are deploying on the systems after they purchase, and which workloads drove the purchase of systems. Those data-centric workloads, so analytics, database, data warehousing, are very, very common on converged systems, and they're common influencers of purchases. That remains the same today, but something that we saw that's a little bit different, or even a lot different, is the rise of ERP in the plans of customers moving forward. So, for example, in EMEA, customers that did purchase systems, ERP was the #1 most influential workload. It was #3 in APAC. So I'm sorry, in the U.S. it was the #1. It was the #5 most influential workload. These are all stronger and higher on that influence scale than they were last year across the regions that we surveyed. So that's going to even change more moving forward, where we saw that it's the top workload, or one of the top workloads on the plans or on the dockets for customers moving forward in terms of what they plan to deploy on converged systems. So now we see a customer base that is starting to move outside of their initial needs, their initial workload requirements, which often do center around data. So whether that's database or analytics or what have you. Yes, there are others, cloud computing and others that we do see being used very often on systems, and will continue to drive the purchase of systems. But this is definitely something that bears watching, because customers see these types of systems, this type of infrastructure, as something that can ease their pains that they are having now with other types of workloads like ERP. So there are opportunities moving forward outside of that core set of workloads. So I talked about things like software and hardware pull-through, and also one thing that we looked at in this research were a whole host of support factors. And what we did find were that APAC, those customers in APAC, these are interesting customers in the way that they behave around or what prompts them to purchase, and then what will prompt them to purchase moving forward, because they tend to focus on a very select group of attributes, whether it's around support, or whether it's just workloads, or whether it's system attributes themselves. Whereas customers in the U.S. and in EMEA tend to consider a much wider range of all of those things, whether it's workload, system attributes, support attributes. So it's a very well-defined market, at least in terms of customer behavior. So, for example, we saw that in APAC, those customers were by far the most influenced by support factors, those things like tech support, proactive updates, and proactive system alerts. And again, 52% of APAC customers were critically influenced by tech support. In EMEA, only 29% were critically influenced by tech support. It's not to say that it's not driving the sales of systems, depending on what they see offered by the vendor, but that's a critical factor in APAC. We do think that additional investments in and that kind of focus on support services in EMEA will help vendors capture what we estimate is a $10.1 billion addressable market for converged systems over the next 12 months in that region. So I talked about some of the software products that are being purchased along with converged systems. Data analysis, data management, we saw those as the top two additional software products purchased with converged systems across all three regions. This is interesting because when we look at those platform-centric types of systems that are essentially designed for things like data analytics, customers don't necessarily need to buy that sort of system, and I think that they realize that because they can purchase software that will enable them to accommodate those requirements on a more general purpose type of system. With that said, is it an easier process to go ahead and buy a platform-specific system? Perhaps, but they might be locked into that system around that particular workload instead of buying a more general purpose system where they can still run that workload, but they can run other workloads as well. It's not to say that those platform-centric systems can't run other workloads, but there's certainly a perception that it's built for one thing, and that might be data analytics, for example. So we also noticed some differences in hardware pull-through as well. So you'll see here that although US and EMEA customers tended to purchase networking equipment with their converged systems, and again, in many cases, this is networking equipment to actually support the presence of those systems on data center floors. Customers in APAC were a little bit different. They most often purchased additional x86 servers. So, I think that this is reflective of the types of data centers that are cropping up in APAC compared to more established data centers in the US and EMEA, where those newer data centers in APAC require, regardless of whatever requirements there are around converged systems, they also have requirements around the rest of their ecosystem. We do think that the opportunity for additional product pull-through in all regions is strong, and we think it's going to remain strong for the foreseeable future. We see a customer base, and we're talking about the enterprise IT customer set, that increasingly approaches IT purchases with a more holistic, full environment mindset. Don't discount the presence of LOB buyers in the conversations, in the purchase process, because that's driving a lot of that holistic type of mindset. They're looking at the big picture, whereas IT folks, in many cases, will have very well-defined needs for a very specific type of infrastructure, a very limited set of workloads in some cases. Depends on the size of the enterprise as well. The larger the enterprise, the more you'll see that. But the LOB buyers, even moving up the chain into larger enterprises, that they, just like in smaller enterprises, look at their overall environment more and more, because it's about what's going to drive the business, not necessarily what's going to drive a particular workload, even though that workload does support the business, of course. So now the vendor perspective. So we saw this is all based around customer satisfaction. So we've been doing customer satisfaction research for about 18 or 19 years. We do it across a lot of different infrastructure types, including x86 hardware, x86 servers. And so we do it here as well. And so we look at a tremendous number of factors, and what we did find in the U.S., we found that Cisco and IBM, and again, let me specify what Cisco is. That's Cisco as it exists within VCE vBlock, within vSpecs, and within FlexPod. Yes, we do know that there are other implementations of converged systems with UCS. These are the three that we focused on. Cisco and IBM, we saw gaining leadership positions in terms of customer satisfaction across a whole host of things, including improved workload performance. And that's improved performance over traditional x86 infrastructure or other server infrastructure as well. But in most cases, it is indeed x86. And also, customers gave high marks to Cisco and IBM for improved infrastructure management. And again, that's improved over whatever else they were using that wasn't converged. Dell. Although Dell customers were satisfied, the customers of all vendors were satisfied, we saw some pretty distinct differences between what Dell customers said and what the customers of the four other primary vendors here said. They're not as satisfied in the U.S. So Dell is definitely behind its competitors in terms of customer satisfaction, but we don't see that in other regions. In the UK, France, and Germany, for example, Dell had a leadership position for customer satisfaction. We do think that there is still the V-start factor that is having some influence here, and what we think is happening is customers do not yet have enough experience with active system in their environments to perhaps gain the high levels of satisfaction they would if they had a few more years under their belt of using these systems. Where, in V-start, we did see high satisfaction in the UK. But with that said, because Dell is achieving higher levels of satisfaction in other regions, we would expect that best practices used in those regions, if Dell was smart, which we think Dell is, it's going to look at what it's doing right in those regions and apply that to the U.S. Yes, we do see many levels of differentiation between systems across these vendors. However, there are a lot of basic types of attributes that we see across systems, which we feel gives vendors who might lag in satisfaction across certain attributes or across the entire range of systems in the portfolio compared to other vendors, gives the fact that there's always going to be those core sets of attributes. Any vendor can compete, and any vendor can work to improve its customer satisfaction. IBM, we saw some struggles there in terms of satisfaction against its competitors in a host of areas. One of those is tech support. Could that change now with those systems being under Lenovo's belt? Indeed, it could, but of course, IBM holds that service contract for a minimum of 5 years. So you're looking at the same support structure for the time being. APAC, very interesting in terms of satisfaction. I'm going to show you some graphs on that. APAC customers were far more satisfied with their systems overall than customers in the U.S. and EMEA. And even though that they do emphasize that smaller set of system attributes and purchase attributes and support, they're happy across the board. And we had, you're talking about an even number of respondents in each of these regions. So, it's representative of what they feel, and their experience is good. So, tremendous opportunity in those countries to improve overall market share for converged systems. APAC is, we also saw Cisco struggling a bit. This is all relative for APAC because all the vendors did pretty darn well in APAC in terms of customer satisfaction. But we did notice that APAC customers pointed to Cisco as potentially challenged against competitors, not lagging, in terms of, they're dissatisfied, but challenged against competitors with things like product design and features, tech support, and proactive updates and system alerts. And that's a factor there that I do want to touch on a little bit in one of the coming slides. That's something that we do feel that proactive updates, proactive system alerts can be a real differentiator moving forward. So here's a look at how system attributes and which system attributes influence the purchase of converged systems. This is on a global basis. So when we look at what we feel are the table stakes, hardware quality and reliability, product design and features, yes, they are very, very influential. Customers expect that the systems they're buying, especially at the prices at which they're purchasing, are going to deliver high levels of hardware quality, reliability, and strong product design and strong features. That's expected. So what they tend to do is look at things like, okay, how much more reliable are converged systems going to be over my traditional architecture? You'll see there 53% of customers consider that critically influential to their purchases. Workload performance as well. Customers want to know that these converged systems are going to indeed run their workloads at a higher performance level than what they can get either with their existing systems or with even new traditional x86 servers, whether rack or blade. Of course, they also look at systems being fully tested, fully integrated. This indeed is a differentiator from traditional infrastructure, but it's not a given in terms of customers are going to expect that the systems are thoroughly tested, thoroughly pre-integrated, depending on the type of system that they're buying. So they, vendors really need to show proof points in terms of the testing, in terms of the configuration, and in terms of the pre-integration for customers to, customers are going to compare across a slew of vendors in this market. It happens. It's going to continue to happen. Yes, many engagements may be driven by the incumbent infrastructure provider in an environment, but there are so many choices out there now that it bears attention to multiple factors that differentiate converged systems from traditional infrastructure. So here's a look at how various support attributes can influence or are influencing the purchase of converged systems. Not a surprise, tech support very strong in terms of being a critical influencer of converged system purchases. But look at 2 and 3. And we rank these by those that are critically influential. So that's not to say that legacy management support is not influencing purchases. It is, but the differentiators are those ones at the top. Proactive and automated updates, proactive system alerts and insights. Customers want an easier management process in their environments. They want less complexity. Complexity is one of the biggest factors that's driving customers toward the purchases of converged systems. Things are just too hard to manage. They want more of a hands-off experience. And they're looking at these technologies and what the vendor provides around them or to facilitate them as differentiators. And they're not just looking at them and saying, oh, great, okay, so your system can do this and my traditional infrastructure can't. They're also looking at vendor A's proactive technology and comparing it against vendor B's proactive technology. These are the movers and shakers right here, and these are what we expect are going to allow certain vendors to pull ahead moving forward, especially as more of this type of infrastructure gets deployed on data center floors. The more of any type of infrastructure that is indeed deployed, the more potential complexity that comes into an environment, and that does not not include converged systems, because even more converged systems can pull in more complexity. And now we see the rise of hyper-converged and vendors like Nutanix and SimpliVity, Scale.io, Pivot3. With a whole new set of value propositions around that management at scale. These types of things, proactive alerts and updates, can indeed secure customer attention, and then secure sales as well, because they expect that a lot of these other things will be part of the overall experience, including legacy management support. So these next couple of slides, I want to show you how purchasers in APAC differ from those in the US and EMEA. If you look at those two factors on the left, improved reliability and improved workload performance, look how many buyers in APAC consider those two attributes critically influential compared to the other regions. So those are the yellow bars, 60% and 57%. That's a perfect reflection of what we saw across all of this research. Whereas you see, yes, these are critically influential as well to buyers in US and EMEA, but it's more spread out moving forward. Not so for APAC. They care about a few attributes, a few workloads, and they're going to purchase based on those. In many cases, the others, they're not as important. You'll see this on the next slide as well. So we look at the support and deployment attributes of converged systems by region, and then cost and purchase as well. Well, this gives you a view into the actual satisfaction. So even though they do look at, on the previous slide, you saw the focus on a couple of attributes. They're still nonetheless satisfied across all attributes. So with that in mind, if you hone in on those attributes that they consider critical, then as long as you're doing everything else around these other factors, around scalability and around ease of purchase with a single SKU, then you know that APAC customers are going to be satisfied because you're hitting the things that are important to them. This is also a reflection in general of how much more critical buyers in the US and EMEA are compared to APAC. Yes, they are generally satisfied with their systems. You only see two or three factors here, tech support, legacy management support, and power savings that are actually below that satisfied line. Those are all EMEA buyers. EMEA buyers in general are much more critical of systems than buyers in other areas. But you'll see in many cases, the US buyers are along the same lines there in terms of their satisfaction. So there's work to be done in the US, there's work to be done in EMEA. APAC, tremendous opportunity. There's a lot of goodwill floating around. And yes, a lot of that is tied to the new car smell that we've talked about before with a new type of infrastructure. But these customers plan to buy more. They're satisfied now. Good opportunity. So I wanted to hone in on two types of attributes in particular, or a set of two attributes, or two sets of attributes rather. So one of those is product design and features. Another one was hardware quality and reliability. This is in the US. You'll see Dell. Dell customers are not this satisfied, but when compared against its competitors, it is definitely struggling in the US with customer satisfaction. You'll see it down there on the bottom left. Other vendors as well, not so strong in terms of customer satisfaction for product design and features. And that other bucket holds a whole bunch of converged vendors, including HDS, Huawei, NEC, the hyper-converged vendors as well, Nutanix, SimpliVity, and a host of others. HP in the U.S., certainly a leader in terms of these two attributes, but HP led other attributes as well, very strong in the U.S. One thing that could change here moving forward in terms of customer satisfaction and customer perception is IBM, which of course is now, those products belong with Lenovo. We don't feel that the actual satisfaction around the performance of systems is going to change. This is the same team coming over. IBM has plenty of strengths that we saw reflected in the customer satisfaction. We don't feel that those are going to change. However, there is still the perception factor. This is something, of course, that HP and Dell have dug into all year and attempted to get customer displacements on the x86 side because of customer unrest or unease around the transition. What we could see is some movement of satisfaction in factors like ease of purchase, possibly around support, although that support will still be coming from IBM. Perhaps things tied to the supply chain, although Lenovo has a tremendous supply chain. So in terms of satisfaction that might be driven through the channel, that could improve. Here's a look at EMEA. HP you still see as a leader, but the big difference here is Dell. These vendors are mostly grouped together. There's not a lot of differentiation in EMEA, but it's definitely worth noting the improvement of Dell in these factors among customers in EMEA. Those other vendors improved as well. Those other vendors also did very well in APAC. IBM did not fare as well in EMEA with these two factors. This is customer satisfaction, this is customer perception. So here's the view for APAC. Oracle way out front, especially with hardware quality and reliability, well, particularly for those factors. The other vendors as well. There's a lot of deployments happening outside of these 5 core brands, and customers in those regions we feel are less tied to brand than they are in the U.S. and EMEA, and that could be having a bit of an impact here. But as more adoption happens in APAC, we could see that satisfaction backing off a bit, and perhaps HP, Dell, IBM, and the various Cisco vendors improving or at least surpassing those other vendors. It depends. We expect consolidation to happen in this market as well. So that other bucket, and these circles are all the same. It doesn't represent market share. But the size of that bucket, everything that goes into that bucket, we feel moving forward there will be some consolidation and simply fewer vendors in that bucket. So that concludes the presentation. I'd like to turn it back over to Allison to begin the Q&A session.
Sure. So we've got several questions that have come through, and I would like to ask anyone who has any additional questions, please send them through now. First question we got right when we started, Christian, was, do you see VMware, vSAN, EMC, Scale IO, and HP Store Virtual as hyper-converged as well?
Yeah, there are definitely elements of hyper-converged in those software-defined storage technologies. I feel that it's a piece of the overall equation, but I think that how they're being sold and deployed, I wouldn't classify those as classic hyper-converged well, classic as far as you can call a relatively newer technology, classic hyper-converged types of technologies compared against an actual system sold as a hyper-converged system with that type of management on it, such as something from Nutanix or SimpliVity. So, yeah, the next question, does the study distinguish between traditional and cloud deployments? So, yeah, so we do have a pretty large number of cloud service providers in this research. We are able to break that out. I don't have those numbers for you now, but yeah, we do have a pretty good representation of those CSPs in this research. So if you'd like to follow up later, we're able to do that.
Hold on, just going through. So we had a question, do you have any plans to expand this analysis to LATAM?
Yes, that is something we are certainly looking at as we move our research into next year. We are looking at opportunities to expand into other regions. So yeah, that is something that we are looking at actively.
The next question we have in queue is, do you see these systems being used primarily for one workload, or do you have data on how frequently the workloads are mixed?
Yep, thank you for that question. So we do know how many workloads customers are using on each system, and it depends on the system itself, the type of system. So vBlocks, for example, we do see multiple workloads being deployed and used. But if you look at platform-centric systems, such as many of Oracle's systems, we tend to see one or at most two workloads deployed in many cases. With that said, outside of those platform-centric systems, customers are deploying more than one workload on their systems, and that's something we saw last year. When we looked at the workloads deployed, yeah, we did see customers using more than one workload in several cases, but we looked at their plans moving forward, and we saw, and these were U.S. customers last year. This year, we massively expanded the research into these other regions. In the U.S. last year, moving forward, when we compared the plans for workload deployment against what was actually deployed, we saw a strong set of workloads that tended to be deployed, whether alone or as a group. But moving forward, customers were considering the whole range of workloads, or most of the range of workloads that were listed in the study as potential targets for deployment on their systems. And now we're starting to see, when we look at individual respondents and we see the various workloads that they did deploy, in some cases they had more than one system, but when those single system customers, we know that they're using more than one type of workload on those systems.
Next question we have is, do you see the trend moving towards hosted ERP and CRM? ServiceNow, Salesforce seems to continue to take market share.
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. I think that these types of customers are customers that want control in their environments, and whether that's for security, whether that's because they feel that they can manage the overall ERP or CRM environment better in-house, these customers are looking at bringing ERP into their environments or expanding their deployments that they already have in-house. So I think that this reflects a bit of a concern, for whatever reason, around hosted ERM. And I think that this is a particular type of customer, although it's certainly a strong customer set. We also look at the hyperscale set in the enterprise, and we even though that's growing very quickly, it's still a very small part of the overall market. Converged systems, this is becoming a very large chunk of the data center market, and so I think that portends some change in terms of what's going to happen with ERP moving forward, and it could indeed have an impact on Salesforce moving forward.
The next question we have, what were the additional x86 servers purchased in Asia used for? Were they just purchased at the same time, or did they address related workloads?
Yeah, so we did look into that a bit, and what we found was that customers were purchasing those servers to handle increased workload requirements for workloads that already existed in their environments, and we assumed were running well on traditional x86 servers. They just needed more of a footprint of those servers in their environments. And so when they wanted to deploy perhaps a new workload or a just emerging workload requirement in their environments, they went to Converged systems. I think that we're not seeing so much related workloads or servers being purchased along with Converged systems to run related workloads, because we think that based on the number of Converged systems that are being purchased, the customers are looking at those systems to handle a large percentage of whatever that workload requirement is. Now, that can differ by vertical or by industry or type of company as well, because a financial institution might be running, or in many cases would be running, a very similar type or very similar set of workloads across the entire data center. Certainly in cloud that happens as well. So yes, in those types of cases, those individual types of customers, we would expect that they are purchasing x86 to run similar workloads. That's for all regions, not just APAC.
Next question we have is, do you think server vendors with strong market share has the best ability to proliferate converged infrastructure solutions, aka Dell, Cisco, IBM, and HP?
Yeah, I think that goes without saying. We see that a lot of the initial engagements around converged systems spawn from existing infrastructure that's in environments. There's a lot of brand recognition too across traditional x86 servers and then storage as well. So thinking of things like vSpecs and FlexPod that customers have a strong comfort level with. So in terms of growing market share, that can go both ways. In the early stages of a new technology expansion, and I think we're past the early days now of converged infrastructure, we feel that the biggest opportunities for market share expansion lie with those larger vendors, due to that comfort level, due to the level of experience with IT staff in data center environments with things like Cisco, Dell, HP, IBM, and Oracle. But as the market matures and the comfort level with the type of infrastructure increases, you'll see more opportunity for smaller, perhaps pure-play vendors in the space. And now we see, hyper-converged growing fairly quickly, and these are, there was the earlier question around software-defined storage and some of those elements. Yes, those do exist, and in many cases they do exist to a very strong level within vendors like HP and VMware. But those very discrete systems from smaller vendors, and I don't want to say unknown vendors, but vendors that are now have been around a few years, will be able to sell to this market more easily once you're past that initial, comfort sort of process that customers exhibit in the early stages. We're past the early stages now.
Okay, the next question we have is satisfaction based on workload performance on technology basis or on technology plus support service comprehensively? So
to preserve the integrity of the survey, and that's, we try not to give too much direction around what customers feel is workload performance. It's an excellent question because there are other factors that play into workload performance. But I would say anywhere from 90 to 95% of the respondents answered the workload performance questions based on the technology itself and the actual physical performance of those workloads, and not also around service.
Okay, the next question is converged infrastructure largely an architecture that makes sense for traditional enterprise customers, or do hyperscale customers also show interest?
Yeah, that's, I think that we're starting to see a little bit of overlap. So when we performed we did our hyperscale research around the same time as converged systems. And hyperscale in the enterprise, we feel that it's being driven primarily by the need to explore alternative infrastructures based on a lot of those factors that we feel are driving disappointment, driving frustration, such as complexity, such as lack of IT budget based on that complexity, because it takes so much time to manage these environments. That's really driving a lot of the purchases for hyperscale in environments there. Now, with that said, there's certainly overlap and there are shared attributes, shared drivers of systems between the two types of infrastructure. But we still see these two types of infrastructure, hyperscale and converged, as satisfying very different workload requirements or environments, if you will. So, whether it's low-end web hosting, yeah, we see that as low-hanging fruit for hyperscale, not so much for converged. So really, I think you need to tie it to the problems or the business pain points the customers are having in terms of overlap between the two, and there are plenty of those.
Okay, we actually had a vendor-specific question come through. The comment was, interesting, how does EMC rate? They are part of more than one converged infrastructure offering.
Yeah, so thanks for that question, Gary. So Cisco was middle of the pack in the U.S., and I'm going back on some slides here. I hope they're reflecting.
I took it back.
Oh, okay.
Which number?
13. So Cisco, within that bucket, there's vSpecs and there's also VCE for the Cisco bucket. Cisco did well, very well in the U.S., and Cisco did well in the other regions as well. It was never a laggard. And I say Cisco, so I'm going to say EMC. EMC was never a laggard in terms of customer satisfaction, except in APAC on a couple of factors. But when we actually broke that out and we looked at vSpecs, vBlock, and FlexPod, vSpecs did really, really well in terms of customer satisfaction. So I just quickly said EMC did well.
Okay. Sorry about that. So the next question we have is, as part of the APAC EMEA conversations, are you including the new hyper-converged solutions as part of the Dell portfolio?
So because we were in the field in the spring, that was not part of the sample, but that is certainly something we are going to consider as we launch this research again early next year.
Okay. Who are some of the other players in the converged market, and how do you see them competing? Yeah,
so this is a really crowded market, and we know that customers are, I talked about that maturity level of the market itself, and we know that, once you get past those initial stages, customers are going to look at a lot of different vendors. And so when we look at vendors such as HDS with its UCP, we look at Huawei with Fusion Cube. We look at, the hyper-converged players, Nutanix, SimpliVity, Pivot3. I think that each of these vendors, and we saw satisfaction for all of the other vendors as well, still strong. even if the market share is nowhere near as large as some of the top vendors. I think that based on what we see customers doing with their budgets, and because we are beyond that initial comfort level, I think that there's still strong opportunities for the other players in this space as well, but it's really getting pretty crowded, because even the portfolios among the titans, if you will, are expanding at a very quick pace. And they're expanding into areas where some of the pure plays play, such as hyperconverged, and it was just mentioned here with Dell. Granted, that some of that effort is with Nutanix. So I think that there's still opportunity for those vendors outside of the core set, but it's going, as more saturation happens in terms of adoption, it's going to become a much harder market to play in, and that's why, indeed, I do expect to see some consolidation at some point in the market.
Okay, great. We have several more questions in queue, so we're going to run take 2 or 3 more questions and run a little bit long. For those of you who have questions we won't get to today, we will follow up with you. So the next question we have is, how will the growth of public cloud affect the growth and share of these systems?
So I talked about the makeup of customers in this market. Still at this stage in the market, I think that we see a very well-defined sort of customer who wants control over the systems, over the management, over the workload and the workload performance within that ecosystem. And I think that moving forward, we will see, more or better developed IT teams around converged infrastructure, around converged systems. So larger pieces or larger percentages of IT staffs will be geared around converged systems. As that happens, I think that it's going to be possible to shield away some of the threat from public cloud, because a lot of and this is something that we looked at in this research, what the threat is around the cloud and adoption of public cloud services, and whether customers looked at public cloud as an alternative to converged systems, or instead of buying converged systems. And all of those factors that you have around public cloud that people are scared of, security, regulations, they all play in here too. And these customers then end up buying converged systems instead of deploying something on public cloud. So as long as we continue to see these massive breaches, as long as we continue to see all of the red tape around regulations, I don't feel that public cloud is going to impact the adoption rate of converged systems moving forward.
Okay, we'll take one more question. As compared to the last round of data you collected, did you see a net positive trend towards hyper-converged platforms, or did you see this remain flat or decline with this customer base?
Yeah, hyper-converged, we saw, compared to last year, simply put, we saw more adoption. So we see, some of these brands moving up the stack in terms of adoption. I think that, so when we look at actual satisfaction, the levels are very similar compared to traditional converged systems. But, customers now, these could be customers who are purchasing, who have already purchased converged systems. Now they're looking at other, or similar architectures as well. Or, that value proposition around hyper-converged is strong enough that they are eschewing traditional converged, if you will, and then just purchasing hyper-converged. It depends on, we see a strong play around, an appliance type of deployment with hyper-converged, and it's your very workload specific type of engagement. We're starting to see that across some of the vendors, and I think that that's going to be reflected on the customer side as well. So a long way of saying that I think hyper-converged continues to show positively in our research.
Thanks, Christian, and thanks to those of you who have sent through questions. I apologize to those of you who had sent through questions that we did not get to them today. What we'll do is we'll reach out to you over the next 24 hours with answers to the ones that we didn't get to in the queue. As we're starting to wrap up, I wanted to share with you this one last slide. So as Christian mentioned, both the Converged Infrastructure Global Landscape Report as well as the Hyperscale Server Customer Landscape Report are available for purchase now. So if you'd like to get information about getting access to that, you can either reach out to Christian, myself, or your sales rep. And as I mentioned, we're going to share all the social media links with you, so I encourage everyone to follow both TBR as well as Christian on the Twitter handles listed here, and join our social media conversations on SlideShare, YouTube, and LinkedIn. We are sharing many of our infographics, our free reports, as well as other commentaries on these 3 platforms, so you get instant access to a lot of the research that we're working on. As you're leaving the webinar, there are 3 quick survey questions. How valuable was the presentation today? How good was the presenter? And if there's any other open-ended feedback that you would like to have to share with us so that we can improve our webinars from quarter to quarter, that is very important to us. We want to make sure that the time that you spend with us is valuable to you. So if there are things that you want to hear more about or less about, we would look to have that information. As many of you asked, we will be sending the slides out to you within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar, along with the recording link. So if you have any additional questions once you get the slides or want to share the link with anyone in your organization and you'd like to have a follow-up conversation, please reach out to us, and we'll do our best to set up that conversation. So with that, I want to thank everyone for your time today, and we look forward to having you on future webinars with us and helping you get the most out of your business investments and moving forward with hyperscale and converged infrastructure investments. Thanks, everyone, and have a great afternoon.